presented by the League of Women Voters of Winnebago County and Oshkosh Media. This event is being simulcast on 101.9 Oshkosh FM Community Radio. This forum may also be accessed by streaming video on the Oshkosh Video website at www.oshkoshmedia.org or on the Oshkosh Media YouTube channel. After a day or two, you'll also be able to find it at the League website. I'm Margie Davey, League of the Women Voters President, and your moderator tonight. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government. Our mission is to inform citizens about major public policy issues and about candidates that are seeking office. We do not support or oppose any political party or any candidate. You may find information about the League at lwvwinnebago.org. Wisconsin State Assembly District 53 includes a few wards in the city of Oshkosh, city of Omro, towns of Oshkosh, Algoma, Omro, Rushford, Napuskin, sorry, I can never get that one right, Utica, Nakaimai, Black Wolf, 6 towns in western Fond du Lac County, Rosendale, and part of Waupun. That's all. Michael Schraa, the Republican Party incumbent, and Joe Lavrenz, the Democratic Party challenger, are asking for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th. Joining me on the panel for this forum are Cecil Streeter, retired high school counselor, and Oshkosh North High School community student Tegan Patton. Our timekeeper will give you cues tonight. Can you raise your hand, timekeeper? Thank you. And we thank you in advance for keeping your answers short so that we can cover as many issues as possible. Audience questions are welcome. Please submit in writing to the League representatives, and we do have people around the room who can give you cards and pencils and pick up the questions for you. Candidates did receive the first 2 questions in advance, so we will move into opening statements. These are going to be 2 minutes apiece. Tell us about your qualifications and why you are seeking election or re-election to the Wisconsin State Assembly. And going alphabetically, we will start with Joe Lavrenz.
Well, thank you. Hi, my name is Joe Lavrenz, and I want to thank everybody for coming in today, everybody for League of Women Voters for hosting, and Mr. Schraa for giving me this opportunity that we can talk and have a good free expression of ideas and hopefully get a good dialogue going. The biggest reason why I'm running now is because after the last election, I couldn't be a bystander anymore. I felt disgust with what happened in 2016 and just the despair of my family after seeing, who was getting into office. And I just wanted to do something. So I started looking around in Sun Prairie where I was living at the time, working with their volunteer groups. I went to meetings with the different representatives that were already there, just to get an idea of what it was like to run for office. Then I moved back to Fond du Lac and saw that this was an opening, and I decided to take it. I worked with the Democratic Party in Fond du Lac, and they've been really helping push to get this up and going and have been assisting me throughout. For my career, I had worked for Charter for about 20 years. Worked starting at the call center and then working my way all the way up to the manager of their operations center. So I've had a lot of experience in working with different groups, trying to make sure that everybody's needs are met and trying to get the most efficiency out of all of our policies and the procedures. I feel like I have pretty good resource management skills that should help, in this new position if I were to get elected. And really, that's been my thing. My entire professional career is trying to make sure that trying to get everybody's needs met as best as we can. I think that that's what the legislature should be doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, Michael, your turn.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for holding this important forum. Thanks to the moderator, the panelists. I'd especially like to thank my beautiful wife, who's here tonight. She's the person who actually keeps everything running smoothly when I'm in Madison or at meetings. My daughter Annalise is sitting next to her. My mother-in-law is here, brother-in-law, a number of friends and supporters. I also want to thank the audience and the people watching on TV. There are many places that you could be tonight, and you've chosen to educate yourself before you go to the voting booth. Lastly, I'd like to thank Joe Lavrenz, my opponent, for being here. I admire anybody that decides to run for office. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication, and it's not as glamorous as one might expect. I'm a small business owner here in Oshkosh. I've been blessed to own Leon's Frozen Custard for the last 30 years. I've lived in this community and district all my life. I've raised my family here, and it's been an honor to represent all of the people of the 53rd District and be their voice in Madison. I ran for office because I felt it was important for our legislators in Madison to have a good business sense and understanding of budgets and economics of not only the state but the district. Just to put it into perspective, the yearly budget for Wisconsin is $36 billion a year, or $72 billion over the 2-year biennium. That translates into $100 million a day being spent to keep Wisconsin running smoothly. Now, in comparison, the city of Green Bay spends $100 million a year in their budget to run their city. I hope you'd agree with me in recognizing how important it is to have someone representing you that has strong fiscal skills. We are elected to be good stewards with your hard-earned tax dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next question, and this one you also had in advance, I believe. If you were, and this time we'll start with you, Michael Schraa. If you were the Assembly Majority Leader, what would you work hard to change?
Well, we do run for leadership, and that is not a position that I'd really want, but if I were the Assembly Majority Leader, one of the misconceptions is that they have a lot of power. Really, the Speaker has the power in our House. And the Majority Leader actually is elected to stand up and pretty much oppose some of the things so that the Speaker is not always getting his way. I would change the process if I were the Majority Leader. To give you an idea, at the end of our session, there are usually, throughout the 2-year period, there's about 1,300 or 1,400 bills that are introduced. Only about 350 to 400 bills actually pass in a 2-year session. But at the end of the session, we have 2 days where we pass about 200 bills in that 2-day period. And it is chaotic. It doesn't give you enough time to really read the bill summaries, to ask questions of the author or other stakeholders. And so I would change that process. I'd stretch it out over 5 days. It doesn't give you a lot of time to sleep if you're actually interested in reading every bill before you pass it. So that's one of the biggest things that I would change. And I don't know how much time I have left, so the third thing I'd change is I'd actually have minority and majority authors introduce bills together. And maybe we'll be able to get into that a little later. 80% of the bills that we pass in the Assembly are actually bipartisan. That could be 1 or 2 of the minority party voting for it, but I was surprised to hear that it was 80%, because a lot of people feel like the 2 sides don't get along, but we do agree on a lot of things. So those are the main things that I would change if I was the Majority Leader.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Joe?
When I started this run, I knew that the first issue I wanted to work on was healthcare. I think that we need to push for Medicare for all or Badger Care for all. And I think that that would be my first steps, would be to try and generate some legislation in order to get that pushed through the state of Wisconsin. We need to have good coverage for everybody. Right now, many people don't have very good coverage, and they're forced to pay premiums that are outrageous or pay drug prices that are just unsustainable. And I feel like that's just something that needs to change in general. I know firsthand that's what my parents go through. My dad has to go to the emergency room every couple of weeks just to get his pills because they won't give him a prescription for it. And he just goes to the ER, gets the pill, he's usually fine right after that, but then it goes another week, same thing happens. That's just not a sustainable way of doing things. We need to be able to get this in there at a reasonable level. The other things that I would like to work on would have been labor rights and also public school funding. I feel like the public schools right now, we're cutting the money at the state level and then just increasing taxes at property tax or in the property levels, and that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Why are we cutting the funding at the top but then having to, at the local level, re-raise your taxes in order to fund the schools. We should be able to do that a lot more efficiently. And that's what I would like to work on.
Okay, thank you. This next question is actually from one of you to the other, so you have opponent questions. I believe you were advised to prepare these in advance too. And I think we will have Michael ask Joe a question first. This should be about a state public policy issue. It's intended to be a dialogue. You'll have a chance to rebut and exchange views. You will have a minute per response, so we'll go back and forth. And I'll let you know when it is. So go ahead.
Good. Okay, it's imperative for someone who represents the 53rd Assembly District to have an extensive understanding how the Department of Corrections operates. As I'm sure you're aware, there are 8 correctional facilities in the 53rd District. The department employs over 10,000 people with a budget of over $2.3 billion. Recently on your Wisconsin Eye interview, you stated that you felt that at least half of the 24,000 inmates that are currently incarcerated could be released. I believe you stated all the nonviolent offenders. My question for you is, what process and time frame would you put in place to release that many offenders while also keeping the public safe?
It's a good question. What I felt, that was also a response to the marijuana question. I felt like the drug offense, because I think marijuana should be legalized. And I feel like people that are using marijuana should be able to be released if they're nonviolent. And that was part of the reason for most of that. I feel like we'd have to put something in place in order to release people, step by step, starting with some of the people that have been there the longest that are, have paid their dues potentially. And that's what I would like to work on first. I know half was was a number that I had not researched, unfortunately, but that was just a guess, in my opinion, of how many were actually in there based on that.
So out of the 24,000, we actually have about 30% of them that are considered nonviolent.
Okay.
Even though if you kill somebody drunk driving, that's considered a nonviolent offense.
Really? That's interesting.
And I guess my question, I'd like to know the process, because
Sure.
we have truth in sentencing.
Okay.
How would you change that? Because you are just not able to go in and release people because of what's on our statute. So how would you change truth in sentencing?
I guess I would feel like if we changed the law, specifically on the drug law, that we could go back and relook at those cases and release the ones that would be, that have been proven to be nonviolent. And we would just have to go through the courts through that.
How long do we get to?
We've gone back and forth, so we're done with that question now.
Okay.
Joe, do you have a question for Mike tonight?
I do. Would you support fair maps legislation similar to what we have in Iowa, where it's a bipartisan, nonpartisan group that actually draws the maps versus the party that's in power?
So I think over the course of Wisconsin's history, it has gone back and forth between the parties. Every 10 years, redistricting happens. And whoever is in power at the time, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, they get a seat at the table and they're able to draw their maps. Now, fortunately for Republicans, the last couple sessions, the elections have gone very well for us. And it just happened to be right before that 10-year period we were in power. We were able to draw the maps. The one issue that you always have to remember is a lot of the Democratic votes, for whatever reason, come from the very urban areas. And so, our district, as you know, spreads over 18 townships. There's some districts way up north that it takes them 2 hours to go from east to west in their district. So I think it's fine the way that it is. I don't believe that because someday we are not going to be in power and the Democrats are going to be able to do it. And so I don't think we have to fix something that I don't believe is broken.
It's understandable.
Good question.
Well, thanks. My opinion on that is I feel like instead of it changing back and forth every couple of years, we just have a group that is independent that can just do it, all the time. That way, it doesn't give off the air of it being unfair when a party has it for more than one cycle.
And ideally, I think that's a great concept, but as you know, the Ethics and the Election Commission is supposed to be nonpartisan.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to take partisan politics out of something that is so crucial to the election process, so.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a challenge, but I think that there's a way, we could definitely do it. Just a matter of getting the right people involved to do it. So.
That kind of goes to one of our audience participation questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and rephrase that a little bit and ask you both to answer. You'll each have 1 minute for this, but very specifically, and I think I already heard your answers, but I'm going to phrase it a little differently. Do you support a nonpartisan process for redistricting? And we'll start with you, Michael.
As I just stated, I think it's very hard. How do you prove somebody's nonpartisan? How are those individuals going to be picked? Most people go to the voting booth, and they may keep that private, but I find that it's very difficult to bring in an open mind in an area where you need, it to be bipartisan. I just don't think that, I don't think that you're able, that you'd be able to fairly do that. I think it'd be very, very difficult. We've saw that with the Elections Commission. Those individuals were appointed and they're supposed to be nonpartisan, and it ends up being a partisan position. I just don't think that, as I said, I think the process has worked over the course of all these years, and it's just recently that, people feel that it's unfair.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I would definitely like to see a nonpartisan group that could handle making the maps. I feel like we need somebody that could be an impartial referee that could design it in order to make it appear more fair. If it turns out, I know that everything does turn into a little bit of partisanship. You could even have it partially elected between the two, between the two parties, if you wanted to. So that way you have half and half. So at least it's got the more of an appearance of being more fair. Whereas I would prefer nonpartisan completely, which means probably going out of the area in order to actually get somebody that could do it, versus just somebody in state that understands the politics of it, possibly importing somebody from another state that doesn't know what the interpolitics are of the entire state in order to design the maps, in order to give each side, a fair shot.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Now we have some questions, both from our panel and from our audience. I've already asked one of our audience questions, so we will move on to one of our panel questions. Cecil, do you have a question for our candidates?
I do. Who am I asking?
You could ask this of Joe first, and then Mike also will respond.
Joe, in this district especially, for farmers, the soil is the foundation of their livelihood. However, surface runoff from farmers and residents impacts water quality of groundwater and our local waterways like the Fox Wolf watershed. How would you balance these vital interests as a state representative?
I think we need to take water quality into very good consideration. So we would have to make sure that we're looking at trying to balance what's getting run off and potentially take that away from the watershed if possible. So that way it doesn't get into the rivers. I don't know if that's going to require some sort of block or fencing in order to prevent that. But just something in that vein might work just to try and prevent that from getting into the water table.
Mike, do you want me to repeat it, or?
Sure.
For farmers, the soil is the foundation of their livelihood. However, surface runoff from farmers and residents impacts water quality of groundwater and our local waterways like the Fox Wolf watershed. How would you balance these vital interests as a state representative?
We've had to do that, and I've had to vote on bills that were related to this issue. Water is a vital resource. It's our life. But farming is also very important, because if we don't eat, we don't survive. There are a lot of CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding organizations. And these are the bigger farms that have 6, 10, 12,000 cows. We actually have a couple in the district, in Rosendale and in Omro, and a couple of other areas. Farmers do not want to pollute the water system. And CAFOs are actually, in a lot of ways, more efficient than some of the smaller farms because they have so many regulations. You've got biodigesters now that are dealing with the manure. And there's actually a company called Aqua Innovations that has a process that squeezes out everything out of the manure. And actually, if you go on the video, you can watch it. Person actually drinks the distilled water that comes out of this process. This is becoming more and more realized, especially up in the Kewaunee County, with the aquifers, that we need to protect, that vital resource. And so we've had to vote on bills that have related to that. And I think farmers are very cognizant of the fact that we need to keep our water resources clean. And they're making every effort to do that. It costs money, but in the long run, it's something that we have to do.
Okay, thank you. Tegan, you have a question for our candidates.
Yes. All right, Mr. Schraa, you can answer this question first, and then
All right.
Mr. Lavrenz, you can follow. We are currently in a political climate where we can't seem to agree on basic facts. What will you do as a leader to bring us back to a time where we think of ourselves as Wisconsinites and Americans rather than Democrats and Republicans?
It's a great question. I'm the chair of the Corrections Committee, and I did something different in the beginning of the session. I called in all the minority members and actually had them sit down, and I asked them questions. And a number of them came through my door, and they were thinking something was up because in the past they hadn't been called into a majority member's office. And we sat for a half an hour, and I got ideas. And in one of the situations, one of my colleagues on the minority party side, I said, do you have a suggestion that we could make this committee better? And she said, allow the minority party and allow the ranking member to ask the second question, because the chair always gets to ask the first question. And I did that. Mm-hmm. And as you're probably aware, and the audience is probably aware, I worked with my Democratic colleagues on the other side of the aisle on the juvenile corrections bill.
Thank you, Michael. Your time's up.
I need to pay attention. All right.
And Joe, do you need the question repeated?
It was about working together, basically, right? And I think that that's something that I've done my entire professional life, is work together with different groups in order to try and achieve a common goal. And really, it's all about getting input from everybody. At the end of the day, if you end up with just one side passing everything that they want versus taking in the information from everybody and trying to get a compromised solution, you're ending up with just one team winning. And that's not the way that it should be. We shouldn't be dividing up into teams like that. We should be divided. We're all Wisconsinites. We're all Americans. At the end of that's where we need to work together and actually compromise on everything. You're not going to always get every single thing that you want, and they're not going to get every single thing that they want. But when you meet in the middle and get the best solution for the majority of people, that's when everybody wins.
Thank you. Okay, Cecil, do you have another question for Joe first this time?
Joe first this time. What criteria do you think the state should use in deciding whether to grant tax incentives to industries for either saving jobs or creating new jobs? Using Foxconn or perhaps Kimberly-Clark as an example, is this a good business strategy for the state of Wisconsin? Why or why not?
I don't feel it's a sustainable one, is the biggest problem. We can't continue to basically offer bribes for companies to stay here in the state or to bring them in. They should be coming on their own accord based on us having a very good education system, having good infrastructure, and having the best workforce available. Those would be the biggest reasons that they should be coming here. If we have to pay them money on top of giving them no taxes, which is what Kimberly-Clark has right now, that's just not sustainable, because what's going to stop the next large company from asking for the same thing and then continuing further and further down that road? We need to make sure that companies stay here because, you know, we have the best, and they should be flocking for that.
Michael?
I do not believe in corporate welfare, but I did vote for the Foxconn bill for several reasons. 13,000 jobs. That's what's estimated that's going to happen down in the southern part of our state. They are tax incentives. We're not taking them suitcases of cash. It will be the largest technology campus in the world when it's built. 12 to 13 Lambeau Field, you know, if you can picture that. There's a supply chain that is going to be created that is going to create huge amounts of jobs. We're already seeing local businesses in this area that are benefiting from the Foxconn construction project. And they donated $100 million to the UW system. For every dollar that we invest in that particular situation with Foxconn, we're going to get $18 in return. So going to Mercury Marine in 2009, they received $65 million in tax credits. They had 1,500 employees. If Mercury Marine would have moved and they were planning on it, we would have lost 1,500 jobs. Mercury Marine now employs 3,000 people. So they've doubled the size. They're going to stay in the area, and that tax base is going to be here a long, long time. And we need more than 2 minutes to answer these questions.
We're only giving you one, you know.
I know, right?
Is it 1 minute?
Yeah.
No wonder.
So say it's only half the time.
I do have a follow-up to that for both of you. When you have economics versus the environment, which is something that has happened with Foxconn project, for one thing, where you're dealing with water, with wetlands removal you don't really move a wetlands ever. All you could do is put some more water somewhere else. How do you justify balancing the economics of that situation against the impact on the environment? And we'll start with you, Michael.
Good question. The economic impact is very, very important. When a wetland in this area would be covered up, they have to create 2.5 times the wetland in another area. So we're not losing any wetland area. The amount of water that they're taking off Lake Michigan, I know that that's a big concern for people. There's actually more water that evaporates every day off of Lake Michigan than what they're going to be using at the plant. And on top of that, what they're putting back into Lake Michigan is actually cleaner because they're recycling and making that water cleaner when they send it back to Lake Michigan. So it's a balance. We have to decide if we want industry in this state. Industry uses water, and I think that it can be done. We maybe sped up the DNR process, but it still has as many regulations as any other business opening up or having to deal with the environment.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
Yeah. It's like Michael said, it's definitely a balance between the two. Obviously, we want to be able to create more jobs, but we can't be creating them at the cost of a lot of our environment. Some of the damage that's going to happen from this build is really not repairable. And that's a very scary thought. We're never going to recover some of these wetlands that are gone. Like, even though we're trying to create 2.5 times more, it's just you can't just move it. It doesn't really work like that. And the big concern I have right now is that the 13,000 jobs that are being offered by Foxconn, is that exactly what's going to happen? This is not a company that has a very good track record, and a lot of these jobs look like they're going to be replaced by automation. I just don't feel like the numbers are going to actually meet up at the end of the day, and that's why it's kind of a scary project.
Okay, thank you. Tegan, back to you.
All right. Do you plan on changing how funds are distributed amongst the public schools? And if so, how would you change how they were distributed?
This one goes to Michael first.
Oh, great. We spend $5.2 billion a year on K-12 education. And I think what you're getting at is the voucher situation, I guess. There's a big misconception out there. We spend $213,000 on vouchers. So over a 6-year period, we spent $30.6 billion on K-12, and we spent $1.2 billion on vouchers. That's about 4% of the total. It's a very small amount. I want kids to be educated the best way that they possibly can be, and allowing people to use vouchers, I can't use them. My income is too high. You have to be at 133% of the poverty level. So to give those individuals an opportunity, I think it's vitally important. There's a misconception also that voucher schools get more money than K-12, and that's a fallacy. Vouchers are $7,500. The average K-12 school gets $11,500 to $12,000 per student. So actually, voucher schools are teaching the kids for less money than public schools. So I think we have a good balance.
Joe?
I would think that the voucher system should be audited just in general. It's like you said about you have to be at the poverty level, but if your income changes in between there, you still can keep your vouchers. And that means that people that are working or that are at well over that 133% of the poverty level still have the vouchers and are sending their kids to the voucher schools, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I also feel like we should be redistributing a lot more at the state level, because we've been cutting the taxes and cutting the profit or everything to the public schools, where the local areas have to raise their own property taxes in order to pay for their schools. It just doesn't make a lot of sense that we're forcing at the local level to pay more for their schools when we could be doing it at the state level.
Okay, thank you. This question is going to go to Joe first, and I'm going to ask it. It's an audience question, and it concerns how marijuana negatively affects lives of teens and young adults, both academically and socially.
Sure.
So how do you believe that legalizing marijuana could benefit young people, along with the other citizens of Wisconsin?
My biggest thing with marijuana is that it's good for pain relief. It's been proven to be better than opioids in a lot of situations, and we currently have a major opioid epidemic. I think that we could wean a lot of people off of opioids onto marijuana. I don't think that young people should be getting into marijuana. I feel like it could be restricted similar to cigarettes or to alcohol, and we just make it an adult-only product. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to, let your kids have marijuana. Just like you wouldn't let them have a cigarette or a beer typically.
Not if you catch them.
Yeah, not if you catch them, really.
Michael, do you have a comment on this?
I did just read an article a few days ago that actually has a report that shows that alcohol has a larger effect on a child's brain than, or marijuana does, versus alcohol. I've changed and progressed in my thinking over the period of time that I've been in the legislature. We did pass and legalize CBD oil. That is an oil extract from marijuana plant that actually has the THC taken out, so you don't get the high. But it deals with, it's excellent for eliminating and reducing seizures or pain management. And I tell you, it's tough because I talked to individuals that are in the counseling business, and they say, please do not legalize marijuana. It's a gateway drug. I talked to other people that believe that, it's a natural product and it should be used. So, I think if there is a chance that, medical marijuana.
You done?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to our next question. Is it your turn, Cecil? I think it is.
Sure.
Okay, would you like to ask a question of Joe?
Joe, I think you're aware that Mike is pretty active in the corrections legislation in the assembly. But what changes would you make to the state's juvenile correction system?
The juvenile system, I think, I really didn't realize how bad it was in the, with the Lincoln Hills until I started hearing reports about it. And that's just ridiculous. That should never be happening in any of our juveniles facilities. I think that overall, just in corrections in general, I think that if we could allow more people to work in those areas, to reauthorize their ability to collectively bargain in order to get better benefits, to get more wages. We'll actually bring in more high quality, workers in the corrections facilities, and that should translate into better treatment for the juveniles that are in those facilities. And I think that overall we should just have better support systems in there as well in order to try and get people rehabilitated versus just, keeping them there for their sentence. They should be a productive member of society when they get out.
Thank you. Michael?
Mike?
Well, I spent a number of months working on this issue, and I'm proud to say on a bipartisan level, we passed the Juvenile Corrections Reform Bill unanimously in the Assembly and the Senate. We're moving those facilities. 80% of the violent offenders, juvenile offenders, SJOs they're called, are from the Milwaukee-Racine area. And so we were shipping them way up to Lincoln Hills, hours and hours away from their family. Tests and studies have proven that, and we use trauma-informed care and best practices, the families have to be involved in their rehab. And so we will be building a type 1 facility, at least one, in the Milwaukee County area. And then we're going to open up smaller residential facilities that are called it's a technical question, a technical name, but they will be smaller and very similar to the Missouri model that Missouri currently does with their juvenile corrections.
Thank you.
Can I have a quick follow-up?
Yes, you may.
Do either of you envision a special role for electronic monitoring with regard to that kind of corrections?
Let's start with Michael. Go ahead.
Ankle bracelets are becoming more and more popular for treatment and diversion. And for juveniles, it's a little bit different because the serious juvenile offenders are people that have killed people and carjacked. So ankle bracelets aren't going to work. But in the smaller facilities, the SRCCCYs, they could very well be used because those facilities are actually not going to look like prisons. They're going to look like homes. They're going to be very secure. And the Department of Corrections has increased the use of GPS monitoring over the past several years.
Yeah,
Joe?
if it's in the ankle bracelet or electronic monitoring like that, that seems to make a lot of sense in order to allow more freedom to, especially for the nonviolent, offenders, to be able to, reacclimate themselves rather than just being stuck, in their cells or in, the one facility the whole time. They could go to other facilities to learn, to take classes, to do things like that. I just think it makes a lot more sense to have that as an option, especially for nonviolent, definitely for nonviolent, not for violent.
Thank you. Tegan, do you have another question?
Yes, I do.
You can start with Whose turn is it? Let's start with Joe.
All right. Are you satisfied with the state's role in healthcare, and if not, what changes would you make?
No, that's a big reason why I'm running, is because I wasn't satisfied with what the state's doing on healthcare. I'm seeing, just from my own personal experience, what my dad and my mom went through just from switching over to Medicare, from their old insurance company. They have to continually pay that money back in order to, fund the insurance company, and then they get to move on to Medicare. It just made no sense to me. And then the way they're getting treated at the hospital itself, where they're just not getting the treatment that they really need, and they have to go out to, they're coming up to Oshkosh to try and get a different doctor in order to have a better chance at getting the medicine that he needs. It just makes no sense to me that we're letting people get inadequate care when we should be able to cover everybody.
Thank you. Mike?
So Medicare for all is not sustainable. It's estimated, the CBO estimated that it's going to cost us $22 trillion over a 10-year period. I think there's other ways to reduce healthcare costs, and a number of those are already taking place. Oklahoma, actually, they publish the cost of their procedures. That creates competition between the medical facilities. We can allow people to shop for insurance across state lines, which we don't do right now. The state of Wisconsin, I voted for it, set up a reinsurance program to lower premiums. I'm currently working on legislation, PBM bill, a pharmacy benefit manager bill, that will actually bring more transparency and hopefully lower the cost of prescription drugs. And we also voted for pre-existing conditions. So in a minute, it's really hard to get all my points in there. But I don't think that Medicare for all is sustainable at all.
Okay, thank you. This is an audience question that I'm going to ask. We're going to give you each 30 seconds for this one. You could answer it just with yes or no, or you can expand upon it. Winnebago County voters will be voting on an advisory referendum asking the legislature to eliminate the dark stores loophole that has allowed big box stores huge reductions on their property tax. Would you vote to change this law? Let's start with Joe.
Yeah, I would definitely vote to change that store. When I heard about that at the party meeting, it just didn't make a lot of sense that was even allowable as an option. So yes, I would definitely vote to change that.
Thank you. Michael?
It's a complicated issue. I was actually a co-sponsor of the bill that never came to the floor this last session, the dark store bill. There has to be a negotiation between the League of Municipalities and WMC that represents all the businesses before we're going to be able to progress and fix this
WMC?
problem. WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce.
Okay.
And I was ready to vote for that bill, and at the last minute it was pulled because of some changes. It will be front and center. There was a Ledge Council study committee this summer that dealt with it, and I am positive that it's going to come up. And it's an important issue that I will be voting on.
Okay, thank you. Cecil, your turn? Yes?
Who do I?
Yes, it's your turn to ask, and you ask Joe.
I asked Joe.
Okay.
Joe, what is your solution for the transportation budget funding that is long-term and sustainable?
Well, I think that the first thing that we might have to do is look at increasing revenues from somewhere, whether that's from increasing the gas tax or increasing registration. Unfortunately, neither of those are popular, but I think that we might need to look at increasing revenues that we're going to be getting that in. And then from there, we can distribute the money better to each of the local areas to allow them to build up which road projects are most important for their area, at the municipality level or the city or town level.
Right?
So again, I don't want to raise the gas tax and give more money to an agency that has not been a very good steward of taxpayers' dollars. We did an audit of the transportation department and found a lot of wasteful spending, things that could have been done a lot differently. They were using stainless steel rebar that lasts 150 years versus steel rebar that lasts 75. A road only lasts 75 years. So I could go on, there was lists of things like that for millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that were wasted in that department, in that agency. I think we could look at tolling. Tolling can be set up very fast. It's electronic now, and it would bring revenue in from all the people coming from out of state. If you raise wheel taxes, and the city of Oshkosh is considering that, that's a really hard hit on poor people with lower incomes because it's $30 per vehicle.
Okay, thank you. Do you have another question, Tegan?
Yes, I have an audience question.
Let's start with Mike with this one.
All right. Do you feel we should have term limits on all of our elected offices?
When I began running several years ago, I said I was not going to be a career politician. And I believe the founding fathers, they were farmers and business owners, and they came in and they legislated and then they went back to their job. We have gotten away from that, and that's why we have so many problems in Washington. The average term in Madison is actually 3.5 to 4 years, which is surprising. That's 2 assembly terms or 1 Senate term. So I don't think that we have to put anything in our Constitution regarding term limits. I think, you know, people vote out individuals and people decide not to run. When you're no longer producing and being effective for the taxpayer, they're going to vote you out. And so I believe that we do not need career politicians in there for 20 or 30 years. But I can tell you in my case, the first 2 years, it's like drinking from a fire hose. And being on joint finance the next 2 years was drinking from a different fire hose. So it takes a while to get your feet underneath you.
Joe?
Actually, for a similar reason, I actually feel like it would be good to have term limits built in, just because it feels like things don't start getting done until you're up against the wall. And that's why I think that knowing that you have a longevity, that you have to get stuff done by this time, otherwise you're going to be gone no matter what, would emphasize pushing more change and actually trying to get more accomplished during your terms versus just waiting it out till the next one. So I would be for term limits, but I'm not sure what that number would actually have to be. It's just a matter, that's something that I think would need to get decided.
Okay, thank you. Cecil, right? Mm-hmm. And this goes to Joe.
Joe, the state share of the UW budget funding has declined from 24% in 2007 to 17% in 2017. Should state funding for the UW system budget increase? Should the tuition freeze be lifted?
I think that we should definitely increase the amount going to the UW system. I think that it losing money it's hurting one of our best attributes that we have as a state, is our education system in the UW system. The tuition freeze may need to get lifted in order to increase money coming in, but that also makes it harder for some people to get into school in the first place, because they're just going to have to take out a higher student loan, and then they're just stuck with that forever. So it's kind of a slippery slope. We've got to figure out where we're going to get the money in order to actually increase how much is actually available for the UW system. And I think that, first off, we should definitely be giving more at the budget level.
Thank you. Michael?
I would vote again this next session, and I believe the governor intends, if he gets reelected, to continue the freeze on tuition. What was happening is tuition wasn't going up by inflation, 1 or 2%. It was going up by 3, 4, or 5%. And the reason some of the cuts took place actually was because of the reserve accounts that were found, not necessarily at UW Oshkosh, but at UW-Madison. A lot of the other colleges were building up student fees and were sitting on enormous millions of dollars. And when that was actually found out, it made a lot of members in the legislature mad, and funding to the UW system was cut because they were able to actually use their reserve accounts. With the cuts that did take place 2 years ago, the reserve accounts didn't go down like we thought that they would go down. So I don't believe that, we need to really change anything. And if the universities become better stewards with taxpayer money, then maybe we can look at increasing tuition maybe 2 to 4 years down the road.
Thank you. Okay, Tegan, you have a question for Joe.
Yes, this is kind of building off the UW budget funding. The state share of UW budget funding has declined from 24% in 2007 to 17% in 2017. Should state funding for the UW system budget increase? Should tuition freeze be lifted?
Isn't that the same
That's
question?
the one
Oh,
we
yeah,
just
sorry,
asked.
sorry, my bad.
I know I heard it somewhere.
I know, it sounded
It
familiar.
was sounding familiar. Would you like to choose a different question?
Yes, I would like to choose a different question.
Would you like to call home?
No.
No friend?
No
Okay.
All right. 14?
How about number 5?
Number 5, all right. Should the state resume funding for the state park system?
And this goes to Mike.
We do fund the state park system. We did increase fees because what we found is that fees were low compared to other states, and I believe we went up $2 to $3 for state park passes. So the question of restoring money or to state park, I don't understand the question because we, all we did was increase the fee that the general public would have to pay.
Your thoughts, Joe?
I didn't realize that we didn't pay for that. That's what the question was? I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Should the state resume funding for the state park system?
Yeah, I didn't realize that the state didn't pay for the state park system, so that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, if we aren't paying for it, then we should be paying for it because the state parks are beautiful. It's nice to be able to go out to a park and actually take your kids out, have somewhere outdoors to, to enjoy with, with your kids and with everybody else. I guess
Okay.
I don't really get that one as much.
We're going to take that one off totally. Just forget we ever asked any of those.
Forget that one, right?
Okay, Cecil, what you got for us?
Well, let's try this one.
Let's give this one to Mike.
Mike, Wisconsin currently has more job vacancies than workers available to fill them, especially skilled. What can the state do to attract, retrain, and/or keep the needed employees?
We have done a lot for workforce development, put a lot of money into that area because we do see that as a problem. In my restaurant, it's across the nation, it's across every industry. We cannot hire the people that we need to keep our businesses open. That it was an initial concern with voting for Foxconn. Where are we going to get 13,000 people? I believe what's going to end up happening is we're going to look throughout the states that surround us and offer incentives for people to come and work in the state of Wisconsin and live here. So I think we'll continue to put money into that area to attract and put more money into workforce development issues to keep and attract a good, strong workforce. But it's tough because we're seeing that good economy across the nation with the shortages. So everybody's scrambling for employees.
Thank you.
There's not an easy answer.
Joe?
I think my biggest push would be to revitalize labor rights to allow collective bargaining to get wages up. Because right now, with being such a hard time to hire more people, why aren't wages going up? They're basically staying stagnant. And that just doesn't make any economic sense. Everything should be going up when you should be trying to hire somebody at a higher rate in order to pull them from a different job, but that's just not happening anywhere. What's going on is everybody's staying stuck in their own job that they currently have. which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like I said, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So in order to bring more people in, we should be raising wages. And I think that that would give more incentive for people to go into work.
Okay, thank you. That ends our questions from the panel and from the audience tonight. Now we're going to give you each 1 minute to make a closing statement, and we will start with Michael for this.
Well, thanks again to the League of Women Voters and the audience for offering great questions tonight. I hope after this hour-long debate tonight that you have a clear picture of the differences between my opponent and I. State of Wisconsin is in pretty excellent shape today, thanks to some of the reforms that Republicans have introduced. Unemployment is at an all-time low, and one of the negative aspects of a booming economy is the shortage of good qualified people. Taxes are stable, and in some cases, we've actually reduced them. We put a record amount into K-12 education, $11 billion. We've invested $100 million for school safety grants to keep our children safe. Our fiscal house is in order, and we finished our budget with a surplus and the largest rainy day fund in the state's history. It's been an honor to serve you and be your voice in Madison, representing the 53rd District, and I humbly ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th. How was that?
Under a minute.
One
Thank you.
second left.
Joe, your turn.
I again want to thank everybody for coming out today, League of Women Voters for hosting this, Mr. Schraa for having this discussion. This was it was educational for me. I hope it was for everybody else, and I hope it was informative too. And honestly, if anybody has questions about me or anything that I stand for, my literature is out on the side. You can get me on my Facebook, or you can email me and let me know what you think, or if there's anything I can do to make me look better. Otherwise, I would like to hope that everybody comes out and votes on November 6th, and I humbly ask for your vote too. Thanks.
Thank you both. This forum has been co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Winnebago County and Oshkosh Media. Thank you to Oshkosh North High School Communities student Tegan Payton.
Thank you.
And to Cecil Streeter for asking questions. Thank you for the League Forum team for putting this together tonight.
When I first did it.
And most importantly, thanks to the candidates for participating tonight.
Good job.
The election is Tuesday, November 6th. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You may register when you go to vote on Election Day if you haven't already. Proof of residency is required. You must also show a photo voter ID in order to vote. To obtain an absentee ballot, write or call your municipal clerk. Early voting for Oshkosh residents begins October 15th at the city clerk's office. Contact your this is a hard word for me. Contact your municipal clerk, no matter where you live, for early voting hours in your municipality. Find information about voter registration, polling place, and ballot at myvote.wisconsin.gov. Our democracy depends on citizen involvement. Your voice equals your vote, so please exercise that right. Thank you.